Sarah's lifeless body lay crumpled in her brother Aaron's trembling arms, her vacant eyes reflecting the hellish glow of their family's smouldering homestead. Aaron sobbed as he clutched her still form. Blood oozing from the ragged hole an Orion plasma bolt had punched through her heart. Sprawled nearby in the dirt were the charred corpses of his parents, butchered by the alien warship that now descended like a monstrous insect before him. Its ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, disgorging a squad of hulking Orion troopers, clad in night-black armor, plasma rifles held at the ready. At their head strode Commander Varys, his reptilian eyes glinting with cruel amusement as he surveyed the carnage. "Well done, warriors," he rasped in the sibilant Orion tongue. "These human vermin are almost too easy to slaughter. Soon this world and its riches will belong to the Orion Empire alone." Aaron looked up at Varys, tears cutting tracks through the soot smeared on his face, a helpless rage building in his heart. The New Eden colonial militia were brave, but their primitive slug throwers and light armor were no match for the Orion's overwhelming technological superiority. The aliens could kill every last man, woman, and child on this planet with near impunity. Varys's lipless mouth stretched in a mockery of a grin as he aimed his plasma rifle at Aaron's head. The human boy braced for oblivion, only for a searing beam of blue-white light to pierce the heavens and slam into the Orion ship with the force of an angry god. The craft instantly vanished in an incandescent fireball, the shockwave hurling Varys and his soldiers to the ground. A monstrous shadow fell across the land as a colossal human warship, bristling with weapons, emerged from behind New Eden's moon. The VSS Valor had arrived, the vanguard of an ancient dreaded armada, and she was out for alien blood. On the bridge of the VSS Valor, a massive human flagship bristling with guns and armor, Admiral Trent Nichols glared at the holographic tactical display floating before him. Red icons representing the Orion ships blinked as they scattered, fleeing the blue markers of his own fleet. Captain Maria Halsey, his XO, looked up from her console. "Admiral, the Orion ships are bugging out. Looks like they're trying to regroup past the asteroid belt." Nichols's eyes narrowed. "Like hell they will. All ships, pursue and destroy. Don't let a single one of those bastards escape." As the bridge crew relayed his orders, Nichols crossed his arms, his gaze hard. Damn lizards made the biggest mistake of their miserable lives, attacking a human colony. Did they forget about the Earth Defense Pact? Centuries ago, when mankind first reached for the stars, every Terran nation had agreed to create a secret fleet, crewed by the best soldiers and armed with reverse-engineered alien tech, stuff light years beyond the colonies or public. That fleet hid in stasis, waiting a final trump card against hostile ETs. "I guess the Orions never learned about that little ace up our sleeve," Nichols muttered. "They've got no goddamn clue about the shitstorm they just walked into." Down on New Eden's surface, Aaron knelt in the blood-soaked dirt, cradling his sister's body. Rage and anguish warred in his heart as he swore vengeance. An APC suddenly skidded to a halt beside him, disgorging hulking figures in black armor. They fanned out, massive weapons sweeping for targets. One pulled off his helmet, revealing a square-jawed face. "I'm Sergeant Travis Dax, Earth Defense Marines, best damned fighters in the galaxy." He hauled Aaron to his feet, pulling him away from Sarah. "I'm sorry, son. We'll treat her with respect, I promise." As his men retrieved Aaron's parents, Dax clasped the boy's shoulder. "Admiral's orders are to evac all civvies to the fleet. You'll be safe there while we take out the trash." Aaron let the Marines usher him aboard the APC. As the vehicle pulled away, he looked back at the burning remains of his home, his face a mask of grief and fury. Aaron sat in the briefing room aboard the Valor, his mind still reeling from seeing his family butchered by the Orions mere hours ago. He hardly looked up as the door hissed open and Sergeant Dax walked in, his combat boots thudding on the deck. "On your feet, son. Admiral wants to see you on the bridge ASAP," Dax said gruffly. Aaron stood and followed the Marine out, not saying a word. The bridge was a hive of activity, crew manning their stations as holographic displays flashed. Admiral Nichols stood at the fore, his uniform crisp, his salt-and-pepper hair cropped short. He turned as Aaron and Dax approached, his lined face grave. Aaron, I can't imagine the pain you're feeling right now. You have my deepest sympathies, Nichols said, putting a hand on Aaron's shoulder. We recovered footage from the colony's security system. That Orion bastard, Commander Varys, he killed your family himself. Aaron clenched his fists, a white-hot rage building in his chest. Nichols looked him in the eye, his gaze hard. I need to know. Are you willing to help us bring that son of a bitch to justice? Yes, sir, Aaron said immediately, his voice shaking with barely suppressed fury. I'll do whatever it takes. Nichols nodded. Good man. I've got a critical mission for you. The Orion ships are falling back to their main refueling station on the other side of the asteroid belt. I need a small team to infiltrate that station and capture it intact. You grew up in this system. I want you to guide them through those rocks. Sergeant Dax will lead the op. You'll be his navigator. Think you can handle that? Aaron straightened, meeting the Admiral's eyes. I won't let you down, sir. Excellent. Gear up and report to Hangar 4. Dax will brief you en route. As Aaron made to leave, he heard Nichols say to Halsey, have the fleet push straight for that station. Bypass any ships that try to draw us off. My gut says they're just a diversion. I want Varys taken alive, you hear me? That bastard is going to answer for what he's done. Minutes later, clad in matte black tactical armor, a rifle mag locked to his back, Aaron strapped himself into a crash seat aboard a Raptor-class dropship. The angular craft lifted off with a roar of engines, rocketing out of the Valor's hangar and banking hard toward the seething chaos of the asteroid belt. Dax stood in the troop bay, a hollow schematic of the Orion station floating before him. Listen up. Our job is to get aboard that station, take out its defenses and secure the command center. Intel says that's where Varys is likely to be, overseeing their retreat. We cut the head off the snake and the rest will fall in line. The dropship shuddered as it plunged into the billowing dust cloud swirling around the asteroids, its sensor arrays sweeping for any sign of an ambush. Tumbling mountains of rock loomed out of the murk, the pilot threading a careful path between them. As a massive structure resolved out of the gloom, Aaron unbuckled and moved to the forward viewport. There, that maintenance airlock near the comm arrays, lightly guarded, and I've used it before on work shifts. Dax checked the location against the schematic and slapped Aaron's armored shoulder. Good eyes, kid. Okay, people, you heard the man. We go in quiet and quick before they... A thunderous explosion rocked the dropship, alarms screaming as a gout of flame erupted from its starboard engine. Grav compensators fluctuated wildly, throwing Aaron hard against a bulkhead. Dax snarled into the cockpit. What the hell just hit us? Dax swore viciously. Get us aboard that station. Forget finesse, just get us close and we'll EVA across. Negative, the pilot shouted. We're losing air and power. Controls are shut. I'm going to try and... Another explosion tore through the dropship, ripping the rear half of the craft away in a firestorm of shredded metal and bodies. The ruined forward section, trailing smoke and debris, spun out of control, slamming nose first into the hull of the Orion station. Inside the near-airless wreckage, Aaron groaned, every inch of his body shrieking with pain. The dropship had crumpled like foil around him, consoles sparking, bodies of his fellow Marines lying broken. He tasted blood, his breath coming in agonized gasps. A few feet away he saw Dax, pinned beneath a collapsed bulkhead, his shattered helmet revealing sightless eyes. A high, thin hiss reached Aaron's ears. He looked up to see an emergency airlock cycling open, the pressure equalizing. A pair of armored Orion troopers stepped into the twisted remains of the dropship, plasma rifles sweeping the confined space. One kicked a body out of his path, growling, Terran scum. Did they really think they could sneak aboard this station? Aaron reached out with a trembling hand, his fingers closing around the grip of Dax's rifle. He had failed his family, failed the mission, failed the Admiral. But maybe, just maybe, he could still avenge the fallen. Summoning the last of his strength, he raised the weapon. Aaron raised Dax's rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, the dropship shuddered and the deck lurched. The Orion troopers stumbled. Seizing his chance, Aaron squeezed off a burst. The rounds tore through the lead trooper's chest and he crumpled. The second dove for cover, plasma bolts sizzling past Aaron's head as he rolled behind a torn bulkhead. Suddenly the dropship lurched again. Not weapons fire this time, but a heavy impact. The docking clamps. Heart pounding, Aaron raked the Orion's position with suppressing fire and lunged for the rent in the hull. He nearly slipped in the slick of blood and hydraulic fluid coating the deck. Gritting his teeth, Aaron climbed through the jagged hole, the twisted edges tearing at his armor. He tumbled into the station's airlock chamber, instinct alone bringing his rifle up as he scrambled to his feet. But no enemies greeted him, only the tense faces of Dax's Marines, weapons trained on the airlock's inner door. Dax crouched beside the control panel, expression grim as he glanced up at Aaron. "Take more than a couple Orion grunts to put me down," Aaron said, injecting a bravado he didn't feel into his voice. Dax just grunted. "We'll mourn the dead later. Admiral's counting on us. You still know the way to the command deck." "All right, people, we're going in hot," Dax called out. "Fire Team Alpha, secure our exit. Bravo and Charlie are with me and the kid. Move out." The airlock door slid open, and the Marines charged into the maintenance bay beyond. Barrel-mounted lights cutting through the gloom, rifle stocks tucked tight against armored shoulders. Shouts of alarm and panicked weapons fire erupted from the Orions manning the bay. The Marines dropped into crouches, Gauss rifles roaring, Orion soldiers crumpled, their lighter armor no match for the human weapons. Aaron sprinted past the fallen Orions to a nondescript hatch set in the far wall. His fingers flew over the keypad, praying his code would work. The hatch hissed open, revealing a cramped service ladder. The Marines followed, mag boots clanging on the rungs. They emerged into a narrow maintenance tunnel, pipes and conduits running along the walls and ceiling. "Which way?" Dax demanded. "Left. Should take us right under the command deck," Aaron replied, the schematic burning in his mind's eye. They moved out, hunched over in the tight confines. Aaron led them through the maze of dimly lit tunnels, trying to ignore the throbbing of his bruised ribs with each breath. An ominous alarm suddenly blared through the station. The Marines tensed, rifles swinging to cover the tunnel behind them. "Shit, they made us. Won't be long before they figure out where we are," Dax growled. "Aaron, tell me we're close." "Ladder to the command deck is just ahead," Aaron confirmed. They reached the ladder. Dax paused, one hand going to his helmet mic. His eyes widened. "Gunfire in the maintenance bay. Alpha team is engaged." He glanced at Aaron. "We're out of time. Get that hatch open." Aaron input his code with shaking fingers. The hatch above them slid open, to reveal the boots of several Orion troopers. The Marines opened fire, the deafening chatter of their rifles echoing in the confined space. Orion screamed and fell from the hatch. Dax hauled himself up into the command deck, Aaron and the rest of the team scrambling after him. They emerged into a scene of chaos. Orion scrambled for cover behind sparking consoles as the Marines poured fire into their positions. A plasma bolt caught one Marine in the chest, hurling him back down the hatch. But the Orion's numbers couldn't match the Marines' firepower and armor. One by one they fell, the staccato bark of human rifles drowning out the hissing of Orion plasma fire. In the sudden silence after the last Orion fell, Aaron heard a familiar rasping voice. He spun to see Commander Varys crouched on a raised platform at the far end of the chamber, a glowing hollow schematic of the station floating before him. "Don't let them near the reactor controls," Varys bellowed. "Purge the command codes and—" He cut off as he noticed Aaron and the Marines. His reptilian eyes widened, then narrowed to furious slits. "You, the whelp from the colony, I'll flay the skin from your bones." Something snapped in Aaron. He didn't feel himself cross the deck, didn't hear Dax's barked command to take Varys alive. All he saw was the butcher who'd murdered his family. Aaron slammed into Varys in a full tackle, the force carrying them both over the edge of the raised platform. They crashed to the deck, Varys's plasma pistols skittering away. The Orion lashed out with a taloned fist, splitting Aaron's lip. Aaron hardly felt it. He straddled Varys, armored fists hammering into the alien's face, pounding armored knuckles into the scales again and again. A small, distant part of him screamed that this was wrong, but it was drowned out by the grief and rage flooding his veins. "Who's killed them, you bastard?" Aaron howled, punctuating each word with a crushing blow. "My family." Varys's struggles weakened, his eyes starting to glaze. Suddenly, hands seized Aaron by the shoulders, hauling him back. He fought against them, snarling in wordless fury, until Dax's voice penetrated the haze. Aaron slumped in Dax's grip, chest heaving, knuckles split and bleeding inside his armored gloves. He stared down at Varys's battered, barely conscious form, a vicious satisfaction warring with the yawning emptiness in his heart. Dax zip-tied the Orion's wrists and ankles. Varys coughed, spattering the deck with dark blood. He lifted his head and spat weakly at Dax's feet. "Fool," he rasped. "You think you've won? The Orion Empire will never bow to you, hairless apes. We will fight to the last warrior, the last ship, the last drop of blood." As if to mock his words, the entire station suddenly shuddered, the deck pitching beneath their feet. Dax grabbed the edge of a console for balance and keyed his mic. "Solid copy, Dax." Nichols's voice crackled over the comm, shots and shouting audible in the background. "We're pushing them back all over the station. Orion ships are bugging out left and right, sending a fire team to escort the package to the brig." Even as the Admiral spoke, the bulkhead doors hissed open, and a dozen Marines stormed onto the command deck. They took one look at the Orion bodies strewn about, and let out a resounding cheer. Dax hauled a dazed Varys to his feet. He glanced at Aaron, still kneeling on the deck, and reached down to clasp his armored shoulder. "You did good, kid, real good. Sarah and your folks would be proud." Aaron just nodded numbly, barely registering the words. As the adrenaline ebbed, the pain of his wounds began to filter through, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his soul. He looked up to see Varys being dragged away, still spitting curses and threats. The Orion's eyes met Aaron's, and in that moment, Aaron saw something flicker deep within those alien orbs. Fear. The fear of a conqueror who's finally been conquered. The fear of a murderer who knows justice is coming for him. Aaron met that gaze, his jaw clenched, and watched unblinking until Varys had been hauled out of sight. Only then did he let Dax help him to his feet, swaying slightly, as the deck seemed to roll beneath him. "Come on," Dax said. "Let's get you patched up. Admiral will want to debrief you." Aaron took one last look around the ruined command center. The bodies of Orion soldiers sprawled among the wreckage of their dreams of conquest. Aaron stood on the bridge of Admiral Nichols' flagship, the VSS Retribution, his eyes fixed on the view screen displaying the United Earth Congress in emergency session. The chamber was a sea of grim faces and clenched fists. "This unprovoked attack on our colony of New Eden," the speaker declared, her voice shaking with barely restrained fury, "coupled with the revelation of the Orion Empire's unspeakable atrocities against its own people, leaves us no choice. The nations of Earth hereby unanimously condemn the Orion Empire and formally declare a state of war between our peoples." A fierce cheer erupted from the assembled delegates, the sound washing over Aaron like a cleansing wave. It couldn't wash away the grief still twisting in his gut, the memory of Sarah's lifeless eyes, but it kindled a spark of grim satisfaction. The Orions would pay for what they'd done. The bridge doors hissed open, and Admiral Nichols strode in, his face set in hard lines. "Commander Varys spilled his guts," the Admiral said without preamble. "Gave us the locations of every major Orion base, shipyard, and fleet deployment." Aaron straightened, a cold fire igniting in his veins. Nichols met his gaze. "We're hitting their forward staging area in the Cygnus system immediately, and son, the Marines were damn impressed with how you handled yourself on that station. They want you in their ranks for this fight." 1,000 memories flashed through Aaron's mind. Sarah's laugh, his father's strong hands, his mother's warm embrace, all snuffed out by Orion cruelty. He nodded, his jaw clenched. "I'm in, sir. I'll take the fight to those bastards. For my family, for New Eden." Nichols clasped Aaron's shoulder, his grip firm. "Then gear up, Marine. We drop into Cygnus in 3 hours. As Aaron strode from the bridge to the armory, he felt the deck shudder beneath his feet, the Retribution transitioning into warp. He paused before a viewport, watching the stars blur into streaks of light. "I'll make them pay, Sarah," he whispered, his breath misting the glass. "I swear it." Light years away, in the obsidian halls of the Orion throne world, Emperor Jar seethed with rage as he paced before his assembled generals. He whirled on the generals, his eyes blazing. "Mobilize every ship, every soldier. We will drown these upstarts in their own blood." One general, an old warrior named Crothar, dared to step forward. "My lord, our fleets are overextended. Our supply lines stretch thin. If we rush to engage—" Jar's hand shot out, talons sinking into Crothar's throat. He lifted the choking general off his feet, ignoring his feeble struggles. "You dare question me?" Jar hissed. "You dare advise caution in the face of these primates?" He strode to the airlock set into the chamber wall, hauling Crothar with him. The general's eyes bulged with terror as Jar input the override code. "Let this be a lesson," the Emperor snarled as the airlock doors slid open. "Cowardice will not be tolerated." He hurled Crothar into the yawning void. The general's scream cut off as the doors slammed shut. Jar turned back to his petrified generals. "Now assemble the fleets, crush the humans, or join Crothar in oblivion." The Orion fleet, a seething swarm of jagged warships and troop transports, tore through the void towards human space and the waiting guns of the Earth Defense Fleet. But those guns were no longer waiting. With the element of surprise, the human fleet dropped out of warp on the very doorstep of the Cygnus staging area, the nexus of the Orion's offensive into human territory. Before the Orion pickets could even sound the alarm, the human ships opened fire, lances of searing light and clouds of armor-piercing projectiles ripping into the enemy formation. On the bridge of the Retribution, Aaron, now clad in the black armor of a Marine, watched the tactical display with a fierce intensity. The Orion ships were reeling, their formations shattering under the onslaught. "All Marine units prepare for drop," Admiral Nichols barked into the fleet-wide comm. Aaron felt his heart pounding as he strode to the drop pod bay, his hands tightening on his rifle. This was it, his chance to avenge his family, to make the Orions bleed as he had bled. He strapped himself into his pod, the hatch sealing with a hiss. The pod shuddered as it was loaded into the launch tube. Over the comm, Aaron heard Sergeant Dax's voice, steady and strong. "Give 'em hell, Marines. Let's show these scaly bastards what happens when you mess with humanity." A fierce battle cry erupted over the comm as the pods launched, hurtling towards the largest of the Orion ships. Aaron gritted his teeth as the pod shook and rattled around him, the friction of re-entry searing the ablative coating. With a bone-jarring impact, the pod slammed into the Orion ship's hull, the breaching charge blasting a hole into the enemy vessel. Aaron kicked the hatch open and leaped out, his rifle already spitting death. He fought like a man possessed, his armor scorched and pitted by plasma fire. He hardly felt the hits, his focus narrowed to the next target, the next kill. The Orions fell before him, their screeches of pain and fury music to his ears. All around him, the Marines fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, their advanced weapons and indomitable will turning the tide against the Orion's superior numbers. In what felt like mere moments, it was over. The Orion ships lay in ruins, their crews either dead or captured. As Aaron stood amid the wreckage, his armor stained with alien blood, he heard Admiral Nichols' voice over the comm, triumphant and fierce. "All ships, press the attack. We've got them on the run now. We won't stop until we've crippled their ability to make war, until they're forced to the negotiating table on our terms." As the human fleet surged forward, smashing through Orion defenses, seizing system after system, Aaron felt a grim sense of purpose settle over him. He poured all his pain, all his grief, into every trigger pull, every grenade throw, every Orion soldier he cut down. He whispered his promise to Sarah with each shot, each kill. He wouldn't stop, he couldn't stop. Not until the Orion Empire was brought to its knees, until it paid for its crimes in blood. His war had only just begun. The human onslaught surged ever deeper into Orion-held space, an inexorable tide of retribution. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Nichols scowled at a flashing alert on the comm panel. "Admiral, we're receiving a distress signal from the Ilari homeworld in the nearby Theta Crucis system," reported the comms officer, her face grim. "They say Orion forces are attacking their cities from orbit." Nichols' jaw clenched. The Ilari were a peaceful species, known for their art and philosophy, not warfare. "Those Orion bastards," he growled. "Divert the fleet immediately. We're not going to let them slaughter more innocents." In the troop bay of the assault carrier Titan's Wrath, Aaron checked his rifle for the 100th time as the ship shuddered from entry into real space. Around him, his fellow Marines fidgeted in their crash harnesses, faces hard beneath their helmets. "2 minutes to drop," barked Sergeant Dax over the din of the engines. "Remember your training and watch each other's backs down there. Let's show these lizards what happens when they fuck with our allies." The Titan's Wrath shook again, more violently as Orion defense batteries opened up on the human fleet. On the bridge, Admiral Nichols snarled orders to return fire and launch all Marine units. The troop bay doors yawned open, the roar of the slipstream howling beyond. One by one, the drop pods blasted clear of the ship, hurtling down through the Orion barrage towards the burning cities below. Aaron's pod shook like a demon-ridden bronco as it hit the atmosphere. He gripped his harness, eyes fixed on the altimeter, unwinding with gut-wrenching speed. At 100 meters, the pod's retros fired, crushing Aaron into his seat. With a bone-jarring impact, the pod slammed into the rubble-strewn street. The harness released and Aaron was up and moving, rifle sweeping for targets. All around him, more pods rained down, disgorging Marines into the maelstrom of urban combat. Plasma fire stitched the air, Orion troops firing from the ruined buildings. Aaron spotted a squad of them crouched behind the smoking wreckage of a ground car. He dropped to one knee, sighting down his rifle's scope. "Contact front," he yelled over the comm. "Engaging!" His finger tightened on the trigger. Then he froze in horror. The Orions were hauling struggling Ilari civilians out of a nearby building and shoving them in front of their positions. Men, women, children, all being used as living shields. White-hot rage seared through Aaron's veins. He signaled his squad, and they began to advance, leapfrogging from cover to cover, trying to find an angle on the Orions that wouldn't endanger the civilians. Then the unthinkable happened. Apparently deciding the civilians had outlived their usefulness, the Orions started executing them, mercilessly, methodically, dragging them out into the street and putting plasma bolts through their heads. Aaron watched an Orion yank a little Ilari girl, no more than 6 years old, out from behind the ground car. She kicked and wailed, her purple skin glistening with tears. The Orion pressed his rifle to her temple. Something inside Aaron snapped. A red haze descended over his vision. He surged to his feet, a wordless howl of rage tearing from his throat, and charged straight at the Orions, rifle blazing on full auto. His squad, caught off guard for only a split second, followed him into the firestorm, their own battle cries joining his. They hit the Orion line like a human thunderbolt, hurdling the civilian corpses, firing and reloading and firing again in a seamless dance of death. At that range, the Orion's plasma rifles were unwieldy. The Marines' assault rifles, built for close-quarters combat, cut them down like scythes through wheat. In seconds, it was over. The Orions lay dead, their blood mingling with that of their innocent victims. Aaron stood over the body of the Orion who'd tried to murder the little girl, his chest heaving, adrenaline still surging through him. The girl lay curled at his feet, whimpering. He knelt down and gently scooped her up. "It's okay," he whispered, holding her close. "You're safe now, I promise." But as he looked around at the devastation, the full horror of the Orion's atrocities hit him anew. Rage and disgust twisted in his gut. He keyed his comm. "Dax, we need to push forward to the government district. If there are any Ilari leaders still alive, that's where they'll be. We have to protect them." "Agreed," Dax replied, his voice grim. "Let's move, Marines, double time." They fought their way deeper into the city, past scenes of unimaginable carnage. Ilari bodies clogged the streets, many of them gruesomely dismembered. The Orions grew more desperate, more vicious, as the Marines closed in on their positions. Near the shattered gates of the governor's palace, Aaron's squad encountered a group of Ilari security forces pinned down under heavy Orion fire. They were trying to evacuate a cluster of bloodied, terrified Ilari officials. "Cover us!" Aaron shouted to his squad. He sprinted through the hail of plasma, skidding to a stop next to the Ilari defenders. "Governor Velos!" he yelled over the din. "We're here to get you out!" A tall, regal-looking Ilari male turned to him, his robes scorched and torn. "Thank the stars," he cried. "Please, we must hurry. They're right behind us." Aaron and his Marines formed a perimeter around the officials, laying down a withering wall of suppressing fire as they hustled them back through the streets towards the evac site. Orion forces tried again and again to break through, heedless of their losses, desperate to kill the Ilari leaders. As they ran, Governor Velos panted out his story to Aaron. The Orions had demanded the Ilari submit to their rule, provide slave labor for their factories and ships. When the Ilari refused, the Orions bombarded their cities and sent in their troops. "Monsters," Aaron spat. "Fucking animals. Don't worry, Governor, we'll protect you and your people. We'll make the Orions pay for this." They reached the evac site, a wide plaza where Navy dropships waited with engines roaring. Marines shepherded thousands of shell-shocked Ilari civilians aboard, many of them wounded, all of them terrified. As Governor Velos and his officials boarded the last dropship, he turned to Aaron, clasping his hand. "Thank you," he said fervently. "We owe you our lives, our freedom. We won't forget this." Aaron nodded grimly. "Get your people to safety, Governor. We'll take it from here." He watched the dropship lift off, then turned to rejoin the fight, only to find himself suddenly cut off alone, Orion troops swarming in from all sides. They'd broken through the Marine perimeter, trapping him. Plasma bolts whipped past him as he dove for cover behind a shattered fountain. He returned fire, rifle bucking in his hands, dropping Orions with each burst. But there were too many. They pressed closer, snarling in their guttural tongue, thirsting for his blood. Aaron fought like a man possessed, like a cornered wolf. His rifle ran dry, and he cast it aside, drawing his sidearm and combat knife. He put a pistol round through the faceplate of one Orion, then buried his blade to the hilt in the throat of another. But he couldn't hold out forever, not alone. A plasma bolt seared across his thigh, and he stumbled. Another caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. A third took him in the side, burning through his armor, and he fell to his knees, vision swimming with pain. The Orions closed in, their cruel laughter echoing in his ears. This was it, then. This was how he died. At least he'd taken a good many of the bastards with him. At least the Ilari leaders had escaped. The Orions raised their rifles, aiming at his head. Aaron bared his teeth in a final, defiant snarl. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of begging, of looking away. He'd stare death in the face like a Marine. Suddenly the Orions paused. They looked up, their eyes widening. Aaron followed their gaze and felt his jaw drop. A black shape fell from the sky, growing larger by the second. A drop pod, but larger than any he'd seen before. It plummeted down like the fist of an angry god and slammed into the plaza with an earth-shaking boom, crushing a dozen Orions beneath it. The impact hurled Aaron backwards, the world spinning sickeningly around him. Through a haze of dust and smoke, he saw the pod's doors blast open. Figures emerged, hulking and armored, bristling with weaponry. They moved with a speed and purpose that was almost inhuman. The Orions opened fire, and the figures scattered, blurring into action. They leapt and spun and dodged, plasma bolts whipping harmlessly past them. Their return fire was instantaneous and precise, each shot a kill. It was like watching a pack of wolves tear into a herd of helpless sheep. The figures were everywhere at once, striking from all angles, breaking bones and severing limbs with ruthless efficiency. The Orions fell before them, their screams abruptly silenced, their bodies piling on the blood-slick cobblestones. In seconds it was over. The plaza fell silent save for the cracks of cooling armor and the wet, gurgling coughs of dying Orions. One of the figures, taller than the rest, strode through the carnage to where Aaron lay, stunned and bleeding. It towered over him, a midnight black colossus, a skull's rictus grin emblazoned on its helmet. It holstered its rifle and reached down, its gauntlet wrapping around Aaron's arm with surprising gentleness. As it lifted him to his feet, Aaron caught a glimpse of the insignia etched into its pauldron, a silver crescent moon embracing a single star, the mark of the Nephilim, the elite of the elite, humanity's darkest angels. Pain and blood loss dragged at Aaron's consciousness. He felt his knees buckle, his vision tunneling to black. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was that grinning skull and the glint of eyes behind the visor, eyes that promised retribution and ruin to all who stood against humanity. Then he knew nothing at all. Aaron swam up from the depths of unconsciousness, his eyes flickering open to the sterile white of the flagship's medical bay. He groaned, reaching for his side, his fingers finding the thick bandage swathing his plasma wound. The medbay door hissed open, and Admiral Nichols strode in, his face grave. "Aaron, glad to see you awake, son." Nichols pulled up a chair, his shoulders sagging. "The Orions have pulled back to their home system. They're digging in, fortifying for a last stand around their homeworld. But we've got them on the ropes. The fleet's gearing up for a final push to end this, once and for all." Fierce determination hardened Aaron's features. He swung his legs off the bed, standing with only a slight grimace. "I need to be on that drop, sir. I'm not sitting this one out." Nichols eyed him carefully. "Son, you took a hell of a hit." "All due respect, Admiral," Aaron cut in, "but I didn't come this far to watch the end from a hospital bed. I'm seeing this through. For Sarah, for all of them." A ghost of a smile tugged at Nichols's lips. He stood and clasped Aaron's shoulder. "Spoken like a true Marine. Get your gear and head to Hangar Deck 5. Your drop leaves in 30. 30 minutes later, Aaron, his wound throbbing beneath fresh bandages and combat armor, strapped himself into a crash seat in the troop bay of a Raptor dropship. The hangar was a hive of activity, Marines checking weapons and equipment, dropships spooling up with a rising whine. The bay doors yawned open, revealing the seething maelstrom of the battle in orbit. The human fleet, hundreds of ships strong, hammered at the Orion defenses with merciless precision. Explosions stippled the void, shattered Orion hulks spinning away trailing flame. "All right, Marines, listen up," the drop sergeant bellowed over the din. "Our target is the Orion capital. Intel says the Emperor himself is holed up in his palace like the coward he is. Our job is to punch through their lines, seize that palace, and drag that scaly bastard out in chains. You get me?" "We get you, sir," the Marines chorused as one. The sergeant grinned wolfishly. "Damn right you do. Let's go show these alien pukes what happens when you piss off the human race." The Raptors, a dozen strong, rocketed from the hangar in tight formation. Instantly, a hail of anti-aircraft fire rose up to meet them, stitching deadly patterns through the sky. The dropship shuddered as rounds pinged off its armored hull. Marines clutched their restraints as the craft jinked and weaved. To their left, a Raptor vanished in a fireball, then another. Heron gritted his teeth as a near miss rattled the hull. He pictured Sarah's face, her laugh, using the memory as fuel for the fire in his veins. They had to make it through. They had to. And then, suddenly, they were through the flak curtain, the ruins of the Orion capital rising to meet them. The dropship flared, vectoring thrust, and slammed down onto a rubble-strewn plaza. The ramp crashed down and the Marines poured out, fanning into a perimeter. Aaron charged down the ramp, rifle up and scanning. An Orion plasma bolt sizzled past his head, and he dropped into a crouch, spotting the shooter in a shattered third-story window. Aaron's rifle barked twice, and the Orion slumped over the sill, trailing indigo blood. All around, the plaza erupted into a fierce firefight. Orion soldiers, hissing battle cries, surged from the ruins to engage the Marines in desperate close-quarters battle. The human soldiers gave as good as they got, Gauss rifles and gyrojet pistols scything down the enemy. Aaron fought like a man possessed, his rifle bucking in his hands, cutting down Orion's left and right. The wound in his side burned, but he pushed through the pain, the rage in his heart drowning it out. Over the comm, the sergeant barked orders, rallying the Marines to push towards the looming edifice of the Imperial Palace at the city's heart. They advanced street by blood-soaked street, Orion resistance stiffening with every step. At the palace gates, a phalanx of Orion tanks and power-armored elites stood ready to repel the attackers. Plasma cannons roared, and Marines fell, but the humans surged forward undaunted, their own armor shrugging off the worst of the barrage. Aaron dove into cover behind the burned-out husk of a ground car, popping up to snap off shots at the Orion line. A plasma bolt skipped off his shoulder plate, searing the paint, but leaving him unhurt. The Marines rushed to obey, Dax and Keller laying down a withering hail of fire as Aaron and Lee sprinted along the palace wall, seeking an opening. They found it in the form of a maintenance hatch, half hidden behind the twisted wreckage of an Orion APC. Aaron slapped a breaching charge on the hatch and stood back. The explosive blew the hatch inward with a thunderous boom. Aaron tossed a flashbang through the gap and ducked through, rifle leveled. 2 stunned Orion guards lay on the floor. Aaron and Lee put them down with tight 3-round bursts and moved on, deeper into the palace. Over the comm, they heard the rest of the squad fighting their way through the main gate, the Orion defenses crumbling. Room by room, corridor by blood-slick corridor, Aaron and Lee fought their way towards the heart of the palace. Orion soldiers fell before them until the floor ran indigo with alien blood. At last they reached the massive bronze doors of the throne room. The remaining Marines converged on their position, battered but unbowed. With a nod from Aaron, Keller placed a shaped charge on the doors. The explosion ripped the doors from their hinges, and the Marines stormed in, rifles spitting death. The Orion Imperial Guard, the finest warriors of their race, met them with fanatic fury. For a moment, the tide of battle hung in the balance. Then a plasma bolt took Keller in the throat. He fell, choking on his own blood. Another took Dax in the chest, burning through his armor. He crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Aaron roared in anguish and surged forward, bullets and plasma bolts whipping past him. He glimpsed Emperor Jar at the far end of the chamber, hissing orders at his guards. Jar saw him coming. The Emperor drew a crackling plasma blade and leapt to meet Aaron's charge. They clashed in the center of the throne room, blades sparking, feet slipping on the blood-slick floor. Jar was fast, inhumanly so, his blade weaving a web of searing light. Aaron parried frantically, his armor smoking where the blade kissed it. He lunged, stabbing with his combat knife, but Jar's armor turned the point. Aaron bared his teeth. "You killed my family, you son of a bitch. I'm going to carve out your heart." They traded blows, the air shimmering with the heat of their blades. Aaron felt his strength flagging, his wound sapping his stamina. Jar pressed his advantage, hammering at Aaron's guard. The plasma blade slipped past Aaron's parry, burning a glowing furrow across his chest plate. He stumbled back, gasping. Jar lunged in for the kill, fangs bared in triumph. Desperation lending him speed, Aaron twisted aside and lashed out with his knife. The blade found the gap at Jar's throat, sinking deep. The Emperor's eyes flew wide in shock. But even as indigo blood gushed from the wound, Jar's blade flashed up and drove into Aaron's chest, piercing his heart. Aaron screamed, falling back, Jar collapsing on top of him. Around them, the Imperial Guard, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons in surrender. The remaining Marines surged forward, securing the throne room. But Aaron saw none of it. He lay on his back, Jar's blade still buried in his chest, his lifeblood pooling beneath him. His hand groped weakly at his neck, seeking Sarah's locket. It had fallen free in the melee, lying a few inches from his grasping fingers. With the last of his strength, he stretched out and closed his hand around it. He fumbled it open, gazing at Sarah's smiling face as his vision tunneled to black. His eyes fluttered shut, Sarah's image still burning bright against the encroaching dark. 1 month later, Admiral Nichols stood before the newly unveiled memorial of the fallen on Earth. A sea of graves stretched out before him, each marked with a gleaming steel headstone. In the center rose a towering bronze statue of Aaron, Sarah's locket held to his chest in one hand, a rifle raised in the other. His face was set in lines of grim determination, forever captured in his final moments. Nichols stepped forward and laid a wreath of white flowers at the statue's feet. He looked up into its cast eyes, his own shimmering with unshed tears. "I failed you, Aaron," he said softly. "I failed all of you. We thought we were ready, we thought we were strong enough. But it took your sacrifice, and the sacrifices of so many others, to show us how much farther we have to go." He straightened, squaring his shoulders. "But I swear to you on the blood of our fallen that we will not falter again. We will take this pain, this loss, and forge it into a shield against the darkness. Humanity will never again cower in fear. We will stride forth into the stars with courage and strength in honor of all you gave for us." He snapped a salute to the statue, to the endless rows of headstones. "Rest easy, soldiers, we'll take it from here." With that, he turned and marched away, leaving Aaron standing eternal vigil over the fallen, a symbol of humanity's unbreakable spirit, and its rise from the ashes of tragedy. A decade had passed since humanity's triumph over the Orion Empire. The once mighty alien civilization lay shattered, its territories absorbed into the ever-expanding dominion of Earth. Across the galaxy, human colonies flourished, their populations swelling with each passing year. The Ilari, the Orion's former slaves, now governed themselves as a protectorate of humanity, their gratitude to their liberators tempered by a growing unease at human ambition. On the gleaming bridge of the UES Invictus, flagship of the United Earth Forces, Admiral Trent Nichols stood before the floor-to-ceiling viewports, gazing out at the blue-green orb of Earth below. Silver threaded his once dark hair, and new lines creased the corners of his eyes, but his bearing remained as erect and imposing as ever. The insignia of Supreme Commander gleamed on his collar, a testament to a decade of unflinching service. "Status report," he barked, turning to face his bridge crew. "All systems nominal, Admiral," replied Captain Lee, his executive officer. "The fleet is in position for the memorial ceremony. Dignitaries from across the colonies will be arriving within the hour." Nichols nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. The ceremony commemorating the 10th anniversary of the war's end was a chance to remind the galaxy of humanity's strength, to quell the whispers of dissent that had begun to echo from the farthest reaches of their domain. But before he could reply, a klaxon blared through the bridge, red lights pulsing on every console. "Report," Nichols snapped, striding to the tactical display. "Admiral, we're receiving multiple distress calls from the outer colonies," Lee said, his face pale. "They're under attack." Nichols leaned over the display, his eyes widening as he took in the data streaming across the screen. A fleet of unknown ships, vast in number and strange in design, had emerged from the uncharted depths of space and fallen upon the colonies like wolves among sheep. Their weapons were like nothing humanity had ever seen, their hulls shimmering with an eerie organic iridescence. Colony after colony winked out on the display, their populations slaughtered to the last man, woman, and child. "Mobilize the fleets," Nichols ordered, his voice like steel. "All ships to proceed to the invaded systems at once. Engage the enemy and protect our people." But even as the human ships raced to meet the invaders, it became clear they were hopelessly outmatched. The enemy vessels danced through the fleet's formations, their weapons slicing through shields and hulls like paper. The Nephilim, humanity's most elite warriors, hurled themselves at the enemy in desperate boarding actions, only to be overwhelmed by the invaders' genetically enhanced shock troops. On the bridge of the Invictus, Nichols watched in helpless fury as his ships burned and died, their crews screaming over the comms as they were consumed by the enemy's strange energies. A terrible realization began to dawn in his mind, a half-remembered legend from the deepest archives of human history. As if in answer to his thoughts, a garbled transmission burst through the static on the view screen. It resolved into a single image, a tall, slender figure clad in armor of a strange, organic design. Its eyes, glowing with an ancient, malevolent intelligence, seemed to stare directly into Nichols' soul. "The progenitors," he whispered, a chill racing down his spine. They've returned. The progenitors, the legendary race that had seeded the galaxy with life eons ago, only to vanish into the void. The ones who had left behind the scattered ruins and cryptic artifacts that had so long baffled human archaeologists. The ones spoken of in whispers and half-remembered myths, tales of an empire that had once spanned the stars, ruling over 1,000 subject races with an iron fist. And now, after untold millennia, they had returned to reap the harvest of their creation. The battered remnants of the human fleets limped back to Earth, trailing wreaths of debris and frozen corpses. They formed a desperate blockade around the planet, their weapons trained on the yawning void, waiting for the progenitors to come. They did not wait long. A vast warp rift tore open the fabric of space, and the progenitor fleet poured through, their ships blotting out the stars. On the Invictus view screen, their vessels seemed to stretch to infinity, a seething swarm of eldritch horror. From its swirling depths emerged a ragtag assortment of ships, vessels of a dozen different species, some familiar, some utterly alien. At their head flew a massive Orion dreadnought, its hull pitted and scarred from 100 battles, but its weapons blazing with undimmed ferocity. "Incoming hail from the dreadnought, Admiral," Lee reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. Nichols nodded, and the view screen flickered to life. The face that appeared was one he had never expected to see again, the craggy, battle-worn visage of Crothar. The Orion General Jar had once sentenced to death for daring to question his mad ambitions. "Admiral Nichols," Crothar rumbled, his voice like gravel. "It seems the wheel of fate has turned, and we find ourselves on the same side of the battle line." Nichols' eyes narrowed. "How is this possible? I saw you executed all those years ago." A grim smile split Crothar's face. "The Orion Empire was not as thorough as it believed. I survived, and I remembered. I remembered the folly of our aggression, the price of our hubris, and I vowed that if the day came when a threat arose that imperiled us all, I would stand against it no matter the cost." He gestured to the motley fleet behind him. "I gathered what remained of our ships, reached out to those among the subjugated species who had the will to fight. We have come to stand with you, Admiral, to fight for the survival of all free peoples." For a long moment Nichols was silent, his gaze locked with Crothar's. Then slowly he nodded. "So be it," he said. "Let us fight then, not as human and Orion, but as soldiers united against the dark. Let us stand together and face the progenitors as one." As one, the human and allied fleets turned to face the progenitor onslaught. Nichols took his seat in the command chair, his eyes hard as he watched the enemy ships grow larger on the view screen. "All ships, engage at will," he ordered. "Let's show these bastards what it means to threaten our homes." And with a flash of engines and a roar of guns, the battle for Earth began. The progenitor ships swept forward, their hulls pulsing with eldritch energies, their weapons spitting streams of incandescent death. The human and allied ships met them head-on, throwing up a wall of fire and steel. On the bridge of the Invictus, Nichols gripped the arms of his chair as the ship shuddered under the impact of enemy fire. Consoles sparked and crewmen fell, but still the flagship fought on, its guns hammering at the progenitor lines. "Shields down to 20%, Lee shouted over the din of battle. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 12. Nichols gritted his teeth. "Divert all power to weapons," he ordered. "We have to hold them back no matter the cost." But even as he spoke, a blinding flash erupted from the heart of the progenitor fleet. A seething ball of dark energy arced towards the Invictus, moving with impossible speed. "Brace for impact," Nichols roared. The ship heaved like a wounded beast as the energy blast struck its flank. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, bulkheads crumpled like paper, and the lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into darkness. In the sudden silence, broken only by the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the groans of the wounded, Nichols pulled himself upright, his uniform torn and bloodied. "Damage report," he croaked. Lee staggered to his feet, his face ashen. "Main power offline, life support failing. The ship is lost, Admiral." Nichols closed his eyes for a moment. a wave of grief washing over him. The Invictus had been his home, his command, for over a decade. To lose her now, in humanity's darkest hour. But there was no time for sentiment. He forced his eyes open, forced himself to look out at the battle still raging beyond the shattered viewports. Human and alien ships fought and died together, their hulls shattered, their crews spilling into the void. They faced an enemy that had once ruled the galaxy, an enemy that had technology far beyond their own. It was a battle they could not win. And yet still they fought. Still they raged against the dying of the light. In that moment, watching his people stand united with those they had once called enemies, Nichols felt a fierce surge of pride. This was their finest hour, even if it was to be their last. Nichols reached out and gripped Lee's shoulder. "Abandon ship, Captain," he said softly. "Get as many of the crew to the escape pods as you can." Lee's eyes widened. "But Admiral, what about you?" For a moment, Lee looked as if he might argue, then slowly he nodded. He clasped Nichols' hand, his grip fierce. As Lee turned and raced from the bridge, Nichols staggered to the command chair and slumped into it. Around him the Invictus groaned and shuddered, the last of its life bleeding away. On the view screen, the battle raged on. Nichols watched as a progenitor ship, its hull writhing with dark energy, bore down on a crippled Ilari frigate. But before it could strike, an Orion cruiser, flames gushing from its ruptured hull, rammed the progenitor vessel amidships. Both ships vanished in a blinding flash of light. Nichols felt a smile tug at his lips, even as tears slid down his cheeks. In that moment he saw the future humanity had bought with its hubris, with its unending thirst for domination. A future where the species of the galaxy stood together, united by bonds forged in the fire of war. A future where the sacrifices of the fallen, human and alien alike, would be remembered and honored for generations to come. As the last of the escape pods jetted away from the dying Invictus, Nichols reached out and pressed his hand to the viewport, his eyes fixed on the blue-green globe of Earth far below. He closed his eyes as the Invictus, his ship, his home, shuddered one final time. May those who come after us remember. And then, in a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns, the Invictus exploded, taking Admiral Trent Nichols with it into the eternal night. In the silence that followed, as the last of the progenitor ships fell back before the onslaught of the Allied fleet, a strange thing happened. Across the battlefield, across the endless expanse of space, weapons lowered, engines stilled. And in that moment, 1,000 different voices, human and Orion, Ilari and Kraith, raised in a single defiant cry, a cry that echoed across the stars, a promise and a prayer in one. Never again. In the smouldering ruins of Earth's once great cities, the ragged remnants of humanity struggled to survive. The Great War against the progenitors had left the planet a shattered husk, its population decimated, its mighty fleets reduced to drifting wrecks. In this bleak landscape, Admiral Thaddeus Grayson surveyed the ruins of New York from the bridge of his flagship, the Indomitable. His cold eyes gleamed with a ruthless ambition as he watched the tattered masses below scrabbling for scraps in the rubble. "Look at them," he sneered to his second-in-command, Captain Ilara Voss. "Weak, pathetic, they cling to the ashes of the past, too cowardly to seize the future." "The galaxy is ripe for the taking," Grayson continued, clenching his fist. "The other species are wounded, reeling. They need a strong hand to guide them, to control them." He turned to Voss, his eyes burning with a fanatic light. "We will be that hand. Humanity will rise again, stronger than ever, and I will lead us to our rightful place as masters of the stars." Voss saluted crisply. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Grayson smiled coldly. "Assemble the fleet. We begin with the Ilari. Their world is rich in resources, and their spirit is broken. They will submit, or they will be destroyed." As the Indomitable and its attendant ships tore open the fabric of space, racing towards the Ilari homeworld, Grayson sat back in his command chair, a cruel smile playing about his lips. The galaxy would learn to fear humanity once again. On the war-ravaged plains of the Ilari homeworld, Karax stood over the smoking bodies of his family, his fists clenched in impotent rage. The human soldiers had come without warning, their weapons spitting death, their faces twisted with hate. Karax's father, a decorated veteran of the war against the progenitors, had tried to reason with them. He had shown them the medals he had earned fighting alongside humans, the commendations from human generals. The soldiers had laughed and shot him in the face. Karax's mother had screamed and thrown herself at them, beating at them with her fists. They had gutted her with their bayonets and left her to writhe in the dust. His sister, barely more than a child, had tried to run. A bullet in the back had put an end to that. Now, as the human ships hung in the sky like bloated carrion birds, as the wails of the dying echoed across the plains, Karax felt something harden in his heart. A cold, implacable rage, an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. He picked up his father's rifle, the weapon feeling heavy and unfamiliar in his hands. He had never wanted to be a soldier, but the humans had taken that choice from him, as they had taken everything else. He looked to the horizon, where the shattered remnants of the Ilari defense forces were regrouping, preparing for a desperate last stand. They would need every warrior they could get. With a final glance at the bodies of his family, Karax turned and marched towards his destiny, the rifle clenched tight in his hands. The humans would pay for what they had done. He would make sure of it. As the human fleet rampaged across the galaxy, subjugating world after world, Grayson's power grew. The resources of a dozen species fueled his war machine, their populations toiling in his mines and factories, their warriors press-ganged into his armies. Those who resisted were crushed without mercy. On the Kraith homeworld, Grayson ordered the firebombing of entire cities, leaving millions dead and the rest cowering in the ashes. On the Naxim colony of Vortex Prime, he unleashed a genetically engineered plague that wiped out half the population in days. In the halls of his flagship, Grayson pored over reports from his spies and informants, his paranoia growing with each passing day. He saw enemies everywhere, plots within plots, threats lurking in every shadow. His purges of the military and government became more frequent and more brutal. Anyone suspected of disloyalty was summarily executed, their families shipped off to labor camps. The crew of the Indomitable walked on eggshells, never knowing who would be next to face the Admiral's wrath. But even as Grayson's tyranny grew, so too did the resistance against him. On a dozen worlds, rebel cells sprang up, striking at human supply lines, sabotaging weapons factories, ambushing patrols. And at the head of this growing rebellion stood Karax, the Orion warrior driven by an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. Under his leadership, the disparate rebel factions began to coalesce into a single, united force. They struck fast and hard, fading away into the shadows before the humans could respond. They liberated slave camps, rallied the downtrodden masses, gathered weapons and ships from the black market and hidden caches. And with each victory, Karax's legend grew. To the oppressed species of the galaxy, he became a symbol of hope, a shining beacon in the darkness of Grayson's tyranny. They flocked to his banner in droves, ready to fight and die for the chance to be free. Grayson raged at each rebel victory, his fury shaking the very bulkheads of his ship. He lashed out with ever greater brutality, hoping to cow the resistance with sheer, overwhelming force. But his cruelty only stiffened the rebels' resolve. For every fighter struck down, 2 more rose to take their place. For every village burned, a dozen more joined the fight. The galaxy teetered on the brink, the fate of billions hanging in the balance. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, a maelstrom of hate and fury ready to consume everything in its path. And that spark was about to be lit. On the rebel stronghold of Zarak 7th, Karax stood before a holomap, studying the latest intelligence reports. His forces were growing stronger by the day, but they were still vastly outgunned by Grayson's military juggernaut. They needed a decisive victory, a crippling blow to the human war machine, and there was only one target that would suffice. Earth, the cradle of humanity, the heart of Grayson's power. It was a staggering risk. Earth was the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy, ringed by layers of orbital fortresses and patrolled by entire fleets. To assault it directly would be suicide. But Carax had a plan, a desperate, audacious gambit that just might work. He turned to his assembled captains, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "My friends," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "the time has come to strike at the very heart of our enemy, to bring the fight to Earth itself." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then a ragged cheer went up from the rebels, a wordless cry of defiance and rage. Carax held up a hand for silence. "It will not be easy," he warned. "Many of us will not return, but if we succeed, we will deal a blow to Grayson's tyranny from which he will never recover." He clenched his fist, his voice rising to a shout. "For too long humanity has ground us beneath its heel. For too long we have suffered under its cruelty. No more." Carax turned back to the map, his eyes hard. "We will need to gather every ship, every fighter we can. We will need to strike fast and hard before they can react." He traced a finger along the glowing lines of the map. "We will come at them from multiple vectors, using the asteroid belts and nebulae to mask our approach. We will hit their defenses with everything we have, punch a hole through to the surface." He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room. "And when we break through, when we stand on the soil of Earth itself, we will show Grayson and his kind the true meaning of fear." The rebels cheered again, a sound to shake the heavens. They knew the odds they faced. They knew the price they might pay. As the rebel ships gathered, as the fleets formed up and prepared for the jump to Earth, Carax stood alone in his quarters, staring out at the stars. He thought of his family, of their bodies lying broken on the plains of his homeworld. He thought of all the others who had suffered under human rule, all the lives snuffed out by Grayson's cruelty. "For my family, for all of us, you will pay." The fleets leapt forward, hurtling into the swirling maelstrom of hyperspace, towards Earth, towards destiny. In the years following the defeat of Grayson, Carax worked tirelessly to build a new galactic order, one based on cooperation and mutual understanding between all species. But despite his best efforts, the scars of the past ran deep. In the grand halls of the new galactic capital, representatives from a dozen species argued and bickered, old grudges and prejudices bubbling to the surface. The Alari delegate, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage, pointed an accusing finger at the human delegation. "You speak of peace and unity," he spat, "but how can we trust you after what your kind did under Grayson's rule? My people still bear the scars of human oppression." The human ambassador, a tall woman with steel-grey hair, met the Alari's gaze unflinchingly. "We have acknowledged the crimes of the past," she said evenly. "We are here to build a better future, together." But her words did little to quell the rising tide of discontent. In the streets of the capital, protests erupted as different species clashed, old wounds reopened. Carax watched the unrest with a heavy heart. He had fought so hard for this fragile peace. Was it all to be undone by the weight of history? It was amidst this turmoil that the news came, rippling through the galaxy like a shockwave. A hidden cache of progenitor technology had been discovered on a remote world, left behind in the aftermath of their retreat. The cache was said to contain advanced weaponry and genetic engineering capabilities, beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instantly, a race began to secure the cache. Carax knew that if such power fell into the wrong hands, it could tip the delicate balance he had worked so hard to achieve. He had to act fast. Assembling a small team of trusted operatives, Carax prepared to infiltrate the heavily guarded facility, where the cache was being held. Among his team was Ava, a battle-hardened human soldier with a haunted past. She was a descendant of one of Aaron's fellow Marines, and carried the weight of that legacy in her every move. As they geared up in the armory, Carax couldn't help but notice the tension in Ava's shoulders, the way her jaw clenched when she looked at him. He approached her cautiously. "I know our species have a complicated history," he said softly. "But we're on the same side here. We have to trust each other." Ava met his gaze, her eyes hard. "Trust is earned," she said shortly. "Let's just get this done." Karax nodded, respecting her reserve. They had a mission to complete. Personal feelings would have to wait. Under cover of darkness, they infiltrated the facility, breaching the outer perimeter with practiced efficiency. But as they fought their way deeper into the complex, they encountered resistance beyond anything they had anticipated. Automated defense systems and genetically enhanced guards stood between them and their goal. In the chaos of battle, Karax and Ava were forced to rely on each other, their survival depending on split-second coordination and unspoken trust. As they took down one threat after another, moving in perfect sync, Karax felt a grudging respect growing for the human soldier. Finally, they reached the central vault. As they prepared to breach the final door, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. It was Zelos, one of their own team, an Ilari with a bitter past. "I can't let you do this, Karax," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "The progenitors wiped out my family. Their technology is too dangerous. It needs to be destroyed." Before Karax could react, Zelos lunged forward, his plasma blade igniting. Ava stepped between them, parrying the blow with her own vibro-knife. They clashed in a whirlwind of sparks and flashing blades. Karax moved to intervene, but Zelos kicked him back, sending him crashing into the vault door. The impact triggered the door's security protocols, and it began to slide open with a hiss. Inside, rows of stasis pods glowed with an eerie blue light. Each contained a piece of progenitor technology, their secrets waiting to be unlocked. Zelos and Ava, still locked in their deadly duel, tumbled into the vault. A stray slash from Zelos's blade sliced into one of the pods, rupturing it. A cloud of shimmering particles billowed out, engulfing them both. Karax staggered to his feet, coughing, his eyes watering. He saw Ava and Zelos on the floor, unmoving. A cold dread settled in his gut. The particles, he realized with dawning horror, must have been some kind of progenitor bioweapon, and now they were loose. He dragged Ava and Zelos out of the vault, sealing it behind them. But it was too late. As they made their escape, Karax could already feel a strange tingling in his limbs, a tightness in his chest. The virus was spreading, and fast. In the days that followed, the scope of the disaster became clear. The virus, a progenitor creation of unimaginable lethality, swept across the galaxy like a plague. It attacked the very genetic structure of its hosts, causing rapid mutation and degeneration. No species was immune, but humans, with their genetic similarity to the progenitors, were hit particularly hard. Entire populations were wiped out in mere days, their bodies twisting and warping as the virus took hold. Galactic civilization began to crumble. Governments collapsed. Societies descended into chaos. The fragile peace Karax had worked so hard to build shattered like glass. In the midst of this apocalypse, Karax and Ava, both fighting the effects of the virus in their own bodies, embarked on a desperate quest for a cure. They scoured ancient progenitor ruins and battled mutated horrors, searching for something, anything, that could stop the virus. In a crumbling progenitor lab on the edge of the galaxy, they found it, a sample of pure progenitor genetic material, untouched by the virus. It was the key to engineering a cure. But as they prepared to make their escape, Ava collapsed, the virus finally overwhelming her enhanced immune system. Karax carried her to their ship, but she knew she would not survive the journey back. Karax held her as she died, tears streaming down his face. In that moment, the last of the old hatreds and divisions between their species seemed to fade away. They were just two beings, united in their grief and their determination. Karax returned to what remained of galactic civilization, the precious cure in hand. It took time, and there were losses, so many losses. But slowly, the virus was eradicated, the plague ended. In the aftermath, the old galactic government, weakened by crisis and mistrust, collapsed completely. In its place, a new alliance arose, one built not on the domination of one species over others, but on true equality and shared purpose. Carax, haunted by all he had seen and lost, stepped down from his leadership role. He retreated into obscurity, seeking solace in quiet contemplation. Years later, on the anniversary of the virus's defeat, a statue was unveiled on the ruins of the progenitor world, where Ava had made her final stand. It depicted Carax and Ava, side by side, their hands clasped in a symbol of unity and sacrifice. As the gathered crowd, a mix of all species, looked on, a child turned to their parent. Who were they? The child asked, wide-eyed. The parent, an Orion with striking human eyes, smiled softly. They were heroes, they said. They showed us that even in our darkest hours, hope and compassion can light the way. The child nodded solemnly, understanding blooming in their young face. They looked up at the statue with new reverence. The camera pans out, taking in the crowd, the statue, the ruins that had once nearly doomed them all. It was a scene of remembrance, but also of hope, a testament to the enduring spirit of all sentient life and the hard-won wisdom that peace is not an absence of conflict, but a constant work of understanding. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.